On the 2.1 liter Vanagons, transporters, Westfalias, whatever they're called, T3s, the oil pressure light, there are two oil pressure sensors, a low pressure and a high pressure. When you first turn the key on, that light should blink. Once you start the engine, that light should go off. At 2000 RPM, if oil pressure is not correct, then that light should come on, it should start blinking, and the buzzer should buzz at the same time. This is the logic board for that oil pressure monitoring circuit or system, and it sits in behind the speedometer like this, and it obviously plugs into the printed circuit board like this. So the speedo sits in there like that, and this is connected. So if the oil pressure switches are no good, then obviously it's an oil pressure switch problem. If it's a hydraulic problem, it's a hydraulic problem. The only way to know is to check with a pressure gauge, a mechanical pressure gauge. In this case, when manipulating the oil pressure switches, the wires in the engine bay, this circuit board was not doing anything with the light here. Key on, the light never came on. At 2000 RPM, the light never came on. And the buzzer, there's a little relay here, or a buzzer that would buzz, or should buzz. Nothing ever happened. I was able to find a used cluster. This is the used cluster here. And I took out the circuit board from this speedometer, the speedo head, and I put it in the current in the van that's running behind me. So this is the one that was out of the other vehicle, or out of the vehicle that's running behind me, and this is no good. My electronic skills are not good enough to decipher what the actual problem is with this logic board. It may very well be repairable. It might not be. These are harder to find these days. If you know where to get these, let me know. It's definitely worth investing the money. Even if it's over $100, you're better off replacing this, fixing the problem, rather than driving with no oil light warning. This van behind me, there was never any warning. The customer was aware of it. Prior owner disconnected the system because it kept setting false warnings, and that's why people get upset. They disconnect it, they bypass it, and then they never have any oil light warning, and that's when problems can arise, because they'll drive the vehicle, there's no oil pressure, they don't get any warning, and then next thing you know, the engine is seized up. I'll go into a quick detail on how to check the wires, the switches, and then keep that in mind when you have a van with this type of system. Okay, as mentioned before, on the 2.1 liter engine, there are two oil pressure switches. There's a low pressure switch, which is the blue wire, and there's a high pressure switch, which is the yellow wire. They're usually connected together via two white connectors here. So somebody obviously separated it and separated the wires into two here. It's easier to manipulate this way. So anyways, when you first turn the key on, the oil light should flash. Okay, so key is off, oil lights are off, obviously, or oil light is off. Key on, oil light is blinking. Coolant light is also blinking, and then it goes off. It's pretty much a self-check. Battery light is always on. So those two red lights should always be on with the key on, engine off. To check the low side system, just disconnect the blue wire. If you have a double connector, just disconnect the whole double connector so that the blue and the yellow are disconnected. Well, I can do that too at this point, so no problem. So both wires are disconnected, back to the front. So key is off. If I turn the key on, because the blue wire is disconnected, the oil light should be off. It should not come on. Okay, it momentarily blinked because of the logic board. Sorry, forgot to mention that. So right now you can see battery light is on, coolant light went off, no oil light. If I start the vehicle, obviously no oil light will be on either, even though the wire is disconnected. So everything is normal right now. You could be driving along, no warning. Because the yellow wire is disconnected, the logic board that's behind the speedometer checks for oil pressure at 2000 RPM. All it checks for is that the wire or the oil pressure switch grounds the circuit. If the circuit does not ground, it sets a warning light and the buzzer. So I'm gonna rev it up to 2000 or just above it, and you'll notice the oil light coming on. It might take a second. There you go. Once it's triggered, it stays active, and you can hear the buzzer. Okay, so that, just like that, you can check your warning system just by disconnecting those that oil pressure wiring plug, just to see if the buzzer and the oil light respond correctly. When everything is hooked up and you get the oil warning light coming on with the buzzer, once the engine is warm, but it's okay when the engine is cold, that usually indicates a lack of oil pressure, insufficient pressure. As the engine warms up, the oil thins out. Thinner oil develops less pressure, develops pressure less easily than thick oil. So you might have an oil pressure problem, worn bearings, or you're just using the wrong oil. The oil is too thin. If the engine is running too hot, temperature gauge goes up to 3/4. It could be because the engine's too hot that the oil gets too thin. With the key on, engine off, if the oil light doesn't blink, it's most likely a pressure switch. I'll show you where those two pressure switches are. The high pressure oil pressure switch, you basically just follow the wires. So the one that's connected to the yellow, you just follow the wire. There it is right there, the brown wire comes over here and it goes down there just below the water pump. You can see an oil pressure switch. That's the connector, that's the switch right there. So that's the one for that's the pressure switch that checks at 2000 RPM. The other one, the wire goes down along the side of the cylinder head here, and it sits underneath the pushrod tubes. I'll lift the vehicle, I'll show you where. Okay, so this is under the engine. You can see the brown wire right here. Goes underneath this heat shield or skid plate or whatever you want to call dust cover. And the oil pressure switch is right in behind here. I might have a video that I can link as to where exactly it is, what it looks like, but all you have to do is remove these two 13mm bolts. There's a nut here and a nut up on this side. It's a bit rusty, and then this cover comes off and then you can replace the pressure switch. The other one is over here under the water pump. That was at 2000 RPM. That was 3,500. In case you were wondering where I was tapped in, on the 1.9 liter, there's only one oil pressure switch, and it's located between the number 4 and number 3 pushrod tubes. On the 2.1, there's a high pressure switch just underneath the water pump.